Welcome to another edition of the Papa Banks Show. Bob Papa, along with two-time Super Bowl champion Carl Banks. Everything National Football League right here. Plus, every week, Carl has something to get off his chest and vent a little bit. We're joined by the one, the only, the incomparable Peter King of NBC Sports, Football Morning in America, and a guy who has been covering this league for a long time. Peter, welcome to the show. Good to have you on.
Great to be on with you guys. Thanks, Bob.
Carl, you got some big news to share with our audience first. Before we get into the off your chest stuff.
I am a first-time grandfather.
Attaboy, baby.
Yes. His name is Zar Damani Banks and was born 8/18 on Wednesday night. Super excited. Congratulations to my son, Courtney.
Yeah, congratulations to your son, Peter. You've experienced this, right? I mean, it's let Carl know what he's in for.
As the grandfather of two, I can just tell you. And look, this week, it's different for us, Carl, because my wife and I, we live in Brooklyn, and we've got one daughter who lives in Berkeley, California, and the other lives in Seattle. And our two grandchildren are in Berkeley, and we were just there this week for Hazel's third birthday. And all I can say is that what's great about being a grandparent is that at about 8:30 at night, you can walk out of the house.
Just hand them back.
You can wash your hands of it and it's over.
That's awesome.
And you have a fantastic time, but then it's over and you go live your life again. So anyway, that's my only advice is to absolutely love it, because you will, and you'll know how great it is when you can walk out of the house at 8:30 at night, get in your car, and go home.
Oh, that's awesome.
All right, you got anything to get off your chest here before we get into it with
No.
Peter?
Really, I do, but I don't. This is I need to pick Peter's brain. This is my pick Peter brain thing, because I'm kind of trying to understand this NFL player association dynamic as it relates to the NFL itself, where they want a lot of rules changes, Peter, in terms of how players practice, and we're seeing more and more soft tissue injuries. But it just seems like the fallback to everything they want is less football. How did they get to this point, and how do you get? I mean, will there ever be a point to where they say, okay, listen, these guys have got to play football because these injuries are getting too much, or are they just going to continue to legislate football out until the season starts?
Carl, it's a great question, and I think this all goes back to 2011 when the NFL owners basically said, there weren't any coaches in that negotiation room in July of 2011. And there weren't coaches saying, you mean we can only have pads on them 14 times during the season? You mean we can only do this, that, or the other thing, and we can't have a real off-season program, comparatively speaking? And look, NFL players have long thought that the off-season program was onerous and it was way too long. But I also think that part of what happened in that long off-season program, and I remember with the Giants when Johnny Parker was the strength and conditioning coach, and he basically started with Bill Parcells, this very rigorous off-season program, which was kind of, it wasn't mandatory, but it was voluntary mandatory. As you well know, you were a part of it.
Yeah,
and
I was.
I think it set the stage for a Giants team that, and look, I think I'm right in saying that the offensive line in that team started 38 consecutive games, over a period longer than 2 years. And they did that in essence because they believe anyway of what they were able to build in the off season. So, and Carl, I think one of the things that is very hard to prove, it appears that there are all these injuries that happen now. And everybody said, geez, why are so many guys getting hurt so early in the year? I thought you were going to go in a different direction. To me, a 17-game season is absurd. It's the height of greed. And I keep hearing about the 18-game season coming at some point in the future. I mean, just look at the injury report now. We're in week 5. Okay, the Tennessee Titans, I don't know. Do they have any receivers on their team now? I mean, they're all beat up. You look at some position groups in this league right now, and it's a debacle. It's an absolute debacle. So I agree with you. I think that something in a common sense way should be done to make sure that the offseason program absolutely gets players ready to play this 4-month season.
You know, and Peter, I know, just Carl, to follow up, and I've said this before, but I'll for this conversation, I'm going to bring it up. Peter, you're a big baseball fan. We got NBA preseason games going on. We have NHL preseason games going on. Baseball has their own version of exhibition season where they play a lot of games. I understand that this sport is different than all the other sports as far as injury, but this sport has gotten to the point now where people think, based on the lack of practice time, the lack of playing in preseason games, somehow they think that you're going to get a good quality product when the last time a lot of guys wore a uniform and played in a game was, say, January 1st or 2nd of the previous year. And then to suit up in September, it makes no sense for the quality of the sport. I mean, this is the only professional sport where people think they can not play it for 9 months and then pick up where they left off.
I agree with you, Bob, and I think that there's no more evidence that you need to see other than the first month of this season where, to me, it's a good thing that these practice squads were expanded last year, because I'm waiting to see the stats this year versus last year. I would bet that there have been more guys activated off practice squads out of necessity, not because they're playing so great and the opportunity is there. The opportunity is there, but not because they're great. The opportunity is there because you have so many injuries.
So I guess my next question then, Peter, is why would the union head encourage players not to show up for off-season conditioning? A lot of them had bonuses built in.
Right. And I don't think, I'm trying to remember, I think the union basically, and I've got to remember this now, but I thought the union said that they're not going to try to stand in the way of guys who have bonuses for their off-season stuff, but they are going to encourage anybody who didn't have those bonuses. Not necessarily encourage. They're basically going to say, hey, this is your decision, and you don't have to show up. So I think that is what the NFL needs to address, and that's what the NFL needs to get right with the Players Association. But look, Carl, I'm just telling you, this contract now is not going to be addressed till 2030. And so wow. I really don't think it's going to change appreciably between now and then, because the only way that it can change is for the players to basically get something in order to have an expansion of the offseason program. What possibly could they get other than money? And who knows, maybe it will end up being money, but I don't know any owners who are going to say, okay, we'll put $3 million a team into a pool to pay players significant salaries to participate in an off-season program. Because look, there are no games in April. There are no games in March. And so if you ask guys to come in, I think if you want to expand it, you're going to absolutely unequivocally have to make it worth their while. And yeah. I don't think owners are gonna pay for that.
Okay, so I got to pick your brain on another one.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a delicate one because I don't need to address the issue itself more so than the dynamic. and that's the Urban Meyer dynamic within his locker room. Now, you've covered players that have dealt with controversies in season, right? And had to kind of get that ultimatum from ownership and say, hey, look, it's up to you to prove that you're on the straight and narrow, whatever. But this Urban Meyer thing, the fact when it came out that he didn't fly back with his team, but at some point during the offseason or during camp, there's always a team address where players are warned about the pitfalls of social interaction, if you will. And so now he has to come back within his organization, face his team. How do coaches deal with that? Is there a spin cycle for that? Because Team PR know how to spin it or position a player just to lay low and do all the right things. How does that work for a coach?
See, Carl, I think there's two dynamics at play here. I think number one, for any player who would say on the Jaguars, and I've not talked to a single player on the Jaguars, so I can't tell you this with any certainty. But for any player who would say that he's lost respect for Meyer and or that he's lost the locker room or whatever, here's the bottom line. At the end of the day, next off season, when a general manager or a scouting director is looking at tape of potential free agents, and he looks at John Q. Public, a tight end for the Jaguars, and he looks and sees him missing blocks and not playing hard and walking around and basically not giving a full effort, okay? That guy, in essence, is cutting his own throat. It doesn't make any sense for any player, regardless of what they think of the head coach. It doesn't make any sense for that guy to give less than his full effort in a game. All he's doing is affecting his own future because what? The coach of the team was fooling around in a bar on a Friday night, after the team lost to go to 0-4 and then didn't fly home with his team. I can think of a lot of things that Urban Meyer has done wrong, but for any player to not be giving a full effort against Tennessee this weekend or in any of the future games, I think is crazy. Now, there's one other point to make here, and that is the thing about flying home with his team after the game. Remember, we'll go back to when the coaching staff of the Jaguars was first announced last winter, and they announced Chris Doyle, the Iowa strength and conditioning coach, as their, basically their strength and conditioning guy. And immediately there was this outcry. And somebody got to Urban Meyer and said to him, you can't do this. You can't do this. And there was a reckoning that day where Meyer got Chris Doyle to resign. And I put that word in quotes. I doubt sincerely that Chris Doyle resigned in the way that we would think of a resignation. Urban Meyer went to him and said, we can't do this. So it's best for all concerned that you resign. And so he did. And what bothers me in this particular case is that somebody knew that Urban Meyer was not coming back on that plane from Cincinnati. And somebody should have said to him, Coach, just telling you, it's a very bad look to not go back on the plane with your team. A very bad look. And Carl, quite honestly, we probably wouldn't have even known about that if the event in the bar in Columbus on Friday night hadn't happened. Nobody would have said anything about it. We wouldn't have known. But we do know about it. It's bad. Urban Meyer needs someone in his organization to say, hey, Coach, that's not how we do it in the NFL. And if you do it, you're creating a huge problem for yourself. Even if Urban Meyer gets off the plane in Jacksonville at 2:15 a.m. and there's a private plane waiting for him to then take him to Columbus. And instead of going to bed at 2:00, he goes to bed at 6:00. Big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. And so all I'm saying is that what this whole incident tells me is that he needs somebody who in his own organization can tell him, Coach, you're creating more problems by doing it this way. Don't do it.
Well, was it Peter? Go ahead, Carl.
I get the part. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Bob.
No. Go ahead. I'll let you go. Go first.
Peter, I get the part where you say that any player that wouldn't play hard is hurting themselves. I don't think players would not play hard because of a coach. I was on a team with Ray Hanley and Rod Rust and those guys, and they had zero credibility. We all played hard. We just didn't like the coach, right? Because at the end of the day, it is a business for players. They know that they have to put forth a good effort, but the culture of a locker room is changed. That dynamic of, whether you trust your coach or whether you believe in what he says is different. You're going to go play hard, whether he's the coach or not, if you're smart about your career. But something about a winning culture versus just a football culture, it speaks volumes to the belief of from players to coach.
Okay, but Carl, I'll ask you this question. Let's assume, and I maybe this is a false assumption, but let's assume that in a football sense that Urban Meyer knows what he's doing. Okay, let's assume that, and let's assume that guys in his locker room, believe that Urban Meyer knows what he's doing. And I think first of all, it's probably too early to think that he doesn't know what he's doing. Okay.
Yeah.
But let's just assume that this guy who one time in his entire career in coaching, 17 years, lost 5 games in a season. He was never worse than 3 games over 500 in 17 years of college coaching. So let's assume that he knows what he's doing, and maybe that it'll turn out to be a false assumption. So if we assume he knows what he's doing, all right, I guess I would say, do you think it is a valid thing to believe that he could that there are guys on that team who could, like, permanently now not respect him and think that he's not a good coach and not a good leader for the team because of those 2 events over the weekend? Like, in my opinion, I think, like, if that were me, I would think, you know what, my antennae are up here. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm skeptical, but it's not like I'm giving up on the guy. That's just how I feel. I might be wrong about it, and I might turn out to be wrong. The only thing I heard this week from inside the team is that Trevor Lawrence was telling a few guys, look, all this stuff doesn't matter. Forget it. It just doesn't matter. We got to play football. And I think my feeling is, from everything I've heard from those around Trevor Lawrence, is that he is sticking up for Meyer right now. So we'll see what happens, but it's a bad look. It's a bad first few months on the job for this guy. And there's no question that Shad Khan, the owner, has to be having second thoughts about handing the keys to his franchise to Urban Meyer. But Urban Meyer has it in his hands right now. He's got 2 strikes on him. Mariano Rivera's on the mound, and he's in trouble. Yeah. He's in trouble. So let's see right now if he's got the stuff to get out of this mess and to build his team and to come back from this. And it's in his hands.
Yeah, in all my years of traveling with teams, and I was the voice of the Nets, the only time a coach, whether it was with the Giants or the Nets, didn't fly back with the team was we were in Miami with the Nets. Ownership came down. It was the year after the lockout, or it was the year of the lockout after the Nets had a good season. Owners flew down. We as the team flew to Toronto to play the Raptors, and John Calipari didn't fly with us. And then he wound up getting fired. I've never seen it before. Peter, the other thing about this, and I know we're short on time here with you, but the other thing about it that bothers me is Urban Meyer does not have a great history of being truthful in some of the things that he's done. He gave two answers. He said, I needed to clear my head. I thought it would be a good thing to clear my head and spend the weekend, decompress a little bit with the way the season started. But then he said people knew about this well in advance, including Trent Baalke. So what was it? Was it he knew he was planning this in advance, or he needed to clear his head with the way things have gone? And plus, from a prepared standpoint, last time I checked after a Thursday night game, Friday, coaches go to work, corrections, getting a head start, not just on the next opponent, but the one after that. Maybe you're going to give the guys the weekend off. Last time I checked, though, after a Thursday night game, coaches go to work. This is the NFL. Yeah. It's not college football. It's not Florida, Ohio State, where 90% of your games, you're going to roll a team out on the field and you're just going to have better players. And you're going to use the wide hash and throw it out to a guy who's a 5-star recruit against a guy who will never even go to an NFL camp. Doesn't work that way in the NFL. What about the preparedness of his football team?
I think it's a legitimate question, and I'd like to know what his marching orders were with his coaches. 3 days off, see you Monday, or are his coaches expected to put the game plan together for Tennessee over the weekend so that everybody walks in on Monday, and your Monday is basically what a normal Wednesday would be? That I don't know, but I think you're right about that, Bob, that, there's a chance that he thought that his team needed this based on the first month of the season, that they needed this little mini bye. And whether it should have been 2 days or 3 days, I think it's a valid question.
Interesting. So, Peter, I know you won't have enough time to explain this one, but this is my rant. So you can think on it. So I am not anti-analytic, but I always say analytics don't have a heartbeat, right? And I'm starting to see, I was watching Colin Cowherd yesterday, and he was talking about the teams that are heavy analytical, use of analytical data versus teams that are moderate. And the teams that have the most success with the analytical data of that list were teams that had good players.
Yeah.
And so people, I always say analytics are somewhat backward looking because they can't predict the future. They can predict what should happen, but you don't know the result until the humans actually do it. And, on third and whatever, if your star wide receiver is down or your quarterback like Russell Wilson just left a game last night, do they still apply? And some people never factor in the human element of it. I know you got to go, but that's
I got time. I got time, Carl. And there's something that I really do want to say about this. And that is that I think people and football, when they talk about football and analytics, they believe that analytics is a little bit too powerful in the decision-making process in football. And I'm going to take you to last Sunday night in Foxborough, where Bill Belichick had an opportunity had a choice with a minute to go in the game and 4th and 3. He could either kick a 56-yard field goal to go ahead, or with Nick Folk, or he could go for it on 4th and 3. And to me, the analytics in this case screamed for him to go for it on 4th and 3 for two reasons. Number one, Nick Folk, that's probably out of his range, or it's very close to his range. And even though he made a great kick, relatively speaking, and it was long enough, I was at the game. It was raining hard, and there was a slight wind at the same time. So I think it was going to be a difficult kick anyway. But let's say that you make the kick and you go up by a point. And you know what you've done when you've made that kick? You've basically given Tom Brady 50 seconds to go and 2 timeouts, needing maybe 50 yards, probably against a softer defense. And for Brady to have let's just say 8 snaps to make 45 yards, 48 yards, I think is a pretty good guess. Now, they still got Suckup is still going to have to make the field goal for Tampa. But all I'm saying is that, not only was the 56-yard field goal a long field goal with a guy who, according to the papers in Boston, has had some issues with his plant leg anyway, health issues. But it's also that you're giving one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback of all time, for 50 seconds to try to go 45 yards to get in position to kick the winning field goal. That is the thing. So in other words, but I only bring that up because, hey, look, Belichick has earned the right to thumb his nose at analytics. He has. He's obviously one of the great coaches in sports history. But analytics basically lays out your options. And they basically say, okay, here are your options. Now do what you think is best. And look, I think what Doug Peterson did in 2017 was utterly fantastic. What Doug Peterson did is he said, I know that if you put this up against analytics, it's going to be very close, but I like going forward on 4th down because I think Carson Wentz is a really good quarterback. I love my offensive line. I'm going to have time to make this play on 4th down. And in most cases, he made it the majority of the time, and he looked really, really smart. But I will just tell you this. Go ahead.
That's because he had the personnel. He laid out to you why he felt that he could do that on 4th down. Not a lot of people will look at their personnel and say, this is going to line up perfectly. Some people will look at it and say, well, the numbers say go for it. But if you don't have the personnel to do it, you've got to do what's in the best interest, don't you?
But most analytics, like for instance, right now, if the Pittsburgh Steelers analytics department basically lays out options for Mike Tomlin on 4th and 2 at the plus 39-yard line, okay, you're going to say, man, a little bit too far for a field goal. Should we go for it? There might be cases like in that where the analytics would also say, hey, listen, our offensive line's the worst offensive line in the league. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all solution right here. You have to take into account your personnel, which you're talking about. And Carl, that's why I think, look, only a coach who is not smart is going to take the sheet of paper that he's handed by his analytics team in which it says all of these things. And keep one other thing in mind. I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you how one team, a good team, a consistent playoff team, uses analytics. Okay. And this, I think, is really, really interesting. The trackers that teams have on their uniforms, okay, that judge how long you run and your speed, and in every practice, how much you have run. And so, and they use that to try to say, hey, listen, we got to ease up on, Daniel Jones has run too much this week. We got to ease up on him today. Honestly, this GM told me this summer, he goes, more than anything else, you know what analytics tells us? It tells us when we need to ease up on guys in practice. He said, our head coach understands analytics very, very well and appreciates them. But for the most part, we use analytics more in practice than we do in games. And it's just, I found that to be pretty interesting.
That is pretty good. But on another note, the Bill Belichick thumbing his nose at analytics, you do know analytics was the major impetus for the game plan we ran against Buffalo in Super Bowl 25.
Tell me about it.
I would say it was 90%. That game plan was based on the analytics of what Buffalo. I mean, he laid out a complete data set of what Buffalo did for the last 8 games of the year and told us this is why we're playing this defense.
Yeah, I think that's good. And look, Bill, my point, Carl, is Bill Belichick has earned the right to say, I'm kicking this field goal with Nick Foles. Yeah. Even though, or not Nick Foles, Nick Folk. But even though I look at that play and I say, I'd never have made that decision in a million years. And I still think, I'll think till the day I die that was a mistake. Even if he made it because he left Tom Brady too much time. But again, as I say, he deserves that because he's earned the right to make those decisions, and he's right a lot more often than he's wrong.
And Peter, you were there. The play before the third down play, it looks to me as if that ball doesn't get tipped at the line. He's got the guy right in the middle of the field, Mac Jones, and they're going to have a big play, and this whole thing becomes a moot point because now they run clock down and have a more makeable field goal.
I'll tell you what really I thought coming away from that game, Bob. I really thought that both teams won. And I thought that if you are either a fan of the Patriots, a player on the Patriots, an owner of the Patriots, I said, we learned something about this game in a really lousy night with huge pressure on Mac Jones. Yeah, were a lot of the throws dink and dunk. Listen, you complete 19 in a row against air. You complete 19 in a row against any defense of any length yards down the field. You've done a pretty good job, but especially imagine how Mac Jones felt coming into that night where, here's the greatest quarterback of all time who you have replaced. And hey, by the way, go out and beat Tom Brady in Foxborough, and so that was that. I thought at the end of the day that if I'm the Patriots, even though it's a loss and even though they're 8-12 post Brady, that was as close to a moral victory as you can have in the NFL.
All right, Peter, I know that you've got to get moving here. So where's NBC sending you this weekend? You heading somewhere?
Hey, listen, I am sitting in my apartment in Brooklyn watching all the games, and I don't go out a lot, Bob. I go out in the playoffs and I go out a few times in the regular season. But one of the things I've really started to love to do is I've loved to have 3 screens and just focus on all the games. That has been really sort of later in my career, something that's really fun to do because after the games, I get, 6 or 7 people on the phone after games, depending on the outcome of them. And I think that I see the entire league better now.
All right. And then what's the big Football Morning in America?
Football Morning in America, NBCSports.com every Monday. And I'm pretty much a one-trick pony. I do some stories for the Football Night in America show, but mostly I'm just writing my column. And Bob, you know what's fun about my life now? I get to take Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday kind of semi-off. For the first time in my life. And I have to tell you, it's kind of enjoyable to go to the West Coast to Hazel King's 3rd birthday party, which we did in the last few days. So I'm kind of enjoying this new life.
Carl, it's something to shoot for, buddy. I think Carl froze on us. He froze on us. Well, Peter, listen, as we always say when we end the Papa Bank show, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. Subscribe. It costs you nothing. And we appreciate you taking a couple minutes to share some of your thoughts about what's going on in the National Football League.